probably have to fight the breeze, but we'll see what happens. Maybe you will see me flying as well after the papers, but that's special entertainment then. Today I want to present to you a small work which provoked my curiosity while I was working on another project. It consists of a membra, or rather a membruna, and a commentary by a metropolitan from modern-day Eastern Turkey to commemorate recently, for that period, deceased metropolitan in India. This surprising link with India cried out to me, this must be presented as Zeri, because usually I work on stuff which has nothing to do with India. As a result, this is also an elaborate apology. I may mix up some Indian names, and possibly my knowledge of the history of the Indian Church is not perfect. So, your indulgence, please. In the coming minutes, I will provide you with a very brief historical context, the important dates and data of both the subject and the author, and on the manuscript. Then I will highlight some general aspects of both the poem and the commentary, and add some, for me at least, striking details. Finally, I will give a general evaluation of the context of the work as a kind of epilogue to my presentation. By the way, you see two pictures here to the right, the author to the left, the subject. We move on to the next slide, please, which is the historical context. I'll be very brief here. What is important, and we have heard it from various presentations before, the history of the Syrian Orthodox in Kerala is complicated, but for the 19th century, let's just say that partly through the influence of the Anglican Church, notably the Church Missionary Society, there was a reform movement initiated both from within the community and from influences from without, which resulted at a split in 1836 at the Synod of Mavelikara. And further on in that century, there was a kind of contest between, on the one hand, Mar Gregorios IV and V, and on the other hand, Mar Athanasius. This contest, this rivalry within the community, led to the invitation towards Patriarch Ignatius Peter III. I use the terminology as used in the 19th century. Nowadays, we would refer to him as Peter IV, to visit India and to attempt to establish unity. And that used to be interpreted by Peter himself and his assistants as an Antiochian unity, of course. This happened at the Synod of Parumala Thirumeni, which did not bring the unity as intended, as the contest between the Autokephalists and the Antiochian Unionists continued. This is very brief, not perfect, I know, but it gives everybody at least a starting point, and not everybody is well versed in the history of the Indian churches. We move on to the subject of the poem, Geevarghese Mar Gregorios. He's better known actually as Parumala Thirumeni. He was born in 1848 in the Chaturuti household at Mulan Thuruti. He became, this is important, you'll see later why it is important. 1872 he became a Ramban, and by 1875 when Patriarch Peter arrived in Kerala, he became a secretary and translator. Keep in mind, Peter only spoke Syriac, and not everybody in Kerala was fluent in Syriac at that time. Then there was the synod at Parumala Thirumeni, and again, the Mar Gregorios was the voice of the patriarch. In part, in appreciation of all those efforts, he became, after the synod, the metropolitan of the diocese of Nirana. Another important aspect or event in the life of Mar Gregorios is the pilgrimage he made with a whole group of people from Kerala to Jerusalem, to the Holy Land. In 1895, he produced himself a travel account, one of the first, as far as my information is correct, in Malayalam, of his travels to the Holy Land. I heard some rumor that there was also an English translation of it, but I haven't found it yet. If anybody knows, I'm very interested. That's an aside. In 1902, he died. We now go to our author, Mar Gregorios of the Nur Islam. He is really a contemporary of Mar Gregorios. He was born in 1851 in Urfa, Edessa. He entered Darul Safran Monastery in 1871, first as a deacon, a few years later he became a priest. And by 1880, he had become the patriarchal representative, the Poetic Eulogy, for Mar Ignatius Peter III in Istanbul, the representative of the church in Istanbul towards the Sultan. Very important position already. By 1896, he was ordained Metropolitan of Kharput, Elazig. And in 1913, he was asked to leave because he came into conflict with so many members of his parish that the context was unworkable, which, with hindsight, was lucky for him because his successor got killed in 1915 during the cyclone. He then was put in charge temporarily of the diocese in Syria for a month until 1916, and by 1917 he was ordained Metropolitan of Amid, Geevarghese. Keep in mind, the cycle, the peak was finished, but there was still a lot of persecution going on all the way into the 20s. So it's not the nicest place to be appointed as a bishop. He took up the seat and he really went in 1917 already. By 1933, he died. He was the last bishop in Geevarghese for the Syrian office. Just once, the next slide. The next, yeah. Just, that's not very clear, but I will point out Edessa first, then Geevarghese, and then Elazig Kharput. Edessa, Geevarghese, Elazig. Just to give you a context where he is living. Nothing to do with India. Next slide, please. Now we come to our little manuscript. It's in the John Rylands Library in Manchester, and it's number 33. The only publication on the manuscript that I found is actually the catalogue by Chip Coakley in the bulletin of the John Rylands Library. It consists of 12, and what I'm now saying is most of it is from Coakley, with some additions of myself. I'll make clear in the publication what are my additions. Right now I'll just present it as one unit. It consists of 12 leaves, one of which is empty. The poem is in praise of the late Indian Syriac author Bishop Geevarghese Mar Gregorios. It's a 12-syllable meter, 85 numbered couplets, with a rhyme throughout of an. So not an, but an. The lengthy notes in the smaller writing next to the poem, according to Chip, these notes also contain a good deal of miscellaneous information on the history and the glories of the Syrian Orthodox Church in India and elsewhere. This is what I am going to talk about later on. It was composed by Dionysius of Kharput in 1903, and there you see the introduction as of the poem. And what is interesting, of course, that in the Syriac there is reference to Shaptur. U is missing Shapturti, Mulan Turti, and Nirana. Now, he made a minor mistake by thinking that he actually was born in the diocese of Nirana. He only later on became the bishop in it. He was not, he was born in a different diocese. But he knew, he had some interesting information of the person himself. Next slide. Here I show you just how the manuscripts act. That doesn't come across that well. Well, this is the layout of the manuscript, and to the right, that is the introduction on top, slightly bigger, but it's unreadable, I'm afraid, for you. But we'll move on to the next slide. Additional comments on the manuscript. There are at least 2 hands in the manuscript. So the first folios, 1 and 2, are very elegantly written. From 3 onwards, it's a bit quicker and it's a different hand. Less diacritic pointing and everything. There are also a lot of corrections, possibly by Mar Gregorios himself. I've seen his corrections in other texts written on his account, and I kind of feel that it is him. In addition, there is a note on folio 6b on an English scholar, James Randall Harris, who visited Mar Gregorios. Several of Mar Gregorios' manuscripts ended up in his library now in Birmingham, Manchester, and Harvard. And it is intriguing that he describes the man as skillful in the Syriac language. My former Dr. Harris appeared to us. He was full of zeal and collected beautiful Syriac books from every race. He made a Geevarghese that would be useful thing to later generations. Just to the next. Here, well, you can't see it, but 2 and 3 are different. Next. Here you have the addition of the note. It's between those blue lines. You see it's a bit messy all of a sudden after folio 2. You just crammed into it, and this is not a representative text. It is a copy made for use. Quick copy, probably. Next, some general remarks about the poem. The poem itself is very generic. Lots of symbolic language, very little, if any, the only real historical material is actually the names mentioned in the poem. The rest is metaphorical, or there's a lot about the good shepherd, as you would expect for any bishop. It's the normal thing you would say, Lord, a bishop. There's also material on the Syriac tradition. So we turn to the, for me as a historian, most important bits, the explanations, because there are interesting things in there. It's much more detailed. For example, it gives the older history of the Syrian Christianity in India, how did Christianity come to India, and some additional remarks about it. It should be mentioned, it had nothing to do with any Indian source. He takes it all from established Near Eastern sources, Near Eastern Syriac sources. And the presentation is clearly from an Antiochian perspective. He does discuss at length Thomas the Merchant and how he went to India. Intriguingly enough, he has a first reference to Thomas the Apostle, but it's only later on in the explanations that he returns to Thomas and gives a slightly longer discussion of Thomas on the basis of the acts of Thomas, of his activities in Kerala as a missionary. The modern history only occurs in couplet 33 and the explanations linked to it, which is on folio 7a. So 33 of 85 sounds, well, before half. Interestingly enough, if you listen 7a, the entire work goes until 11b, and that's only half the page. So we're way over the way past the half point before he even gets to the modern day and Gregorios. So most important to him is actually the old times. Next slide. Explanation to. Okay. What is important to him? First, he explains that the Syriac Orthodox in the Near East were always an important community. So he picks out all those winners, let's put it that way. And now we are talking about economic winners, people who are rich, who build churches, monasteries, everything. He goes on at length about those. He also discusses the struggle in the 6th century of Jacob Gordana. He talks about persecution through time. Actually, there sometimes India pops up, as he's also indicating it's not only tough for my church in the Near East, it's also tough in India. But that's very general. He talks about the spread of the church, again, mainly in the Near East. He talks about China, and then he also picks up India as an afterthought. Syriac Church is the oldest, and then it means the physical church, and then he links it to Acts 12:12, the house of Martyrs, which is now then the monastery of St. Mark. I find it interesting how elaborate he presents that. And I need to look more into that more. Then he has an entire account of why the Syriac language is the oldest language, which he finishes off with, but we hear from some that Malaya, Malayo, he makes of it, but that means Malaya, a language and speech is close to divine holiness. So he's going to be nice, it seems. Flourishing book culture, that is also very important to him. We write good books, beautiful books. And the interesting thing is that he also then refers to people who don't believe me, let him go to the cities of France, of Europe, and let him see the Geevarghese of books, to see and read the books that were written in the monasteries and cloisters of the Syrians. So he refers to the Western libraries. Already 5 minutes, we go very fast, I'll tell you that. Next, sources. Very famous authors from the West Syrian tradition. Like I said, Western scholars are used as witnesses a lot, but never by name. Syrian Orthodox sources are never mentioned by name. Next, he has a clear personal involvement because he presents himself as wanting to go to India to prophesy and be present at the funeral of Mar Gregorios. Next, we come into the more specific details. He has a lot about Mar Dionysius V. I will not go into it, but it's a eulogy on him as much as it is on Gregory. That's intriguing. Next, he also refers to something which I found intriguing, a printing press, which was available through Julius Alvarez, known to the people who work on Syriac, of Christianity here in India. That printing press is used to print books and teaching material which was sent to the Near East. And he thinks, if I interpreted this correctly, he says to us, this may be Mar Dionysius himself, it may also be us as the church in the Near East. But it's important. Syriac books are coming in from India. I have not heard that, so I'm surprised with that. Next. Manuscripts are going the other way. Beautiful manuscripts are sent to India, again, by personal connection with Mar Gregorios. Next, this is the intriguing link. This is a guy that Mar Dionysius knows by personally. Stasius Baba. He became later the Metropolitan after 1902. But he had been in India for a long time, but he came originally from the Turadeen. And that's the link, I think, between our author and India. And his interest in Shiva. Next, the pilgrimage to Jerusalem. He explicitly mentions that, and the impact it had on the community in Jerusalem. And more notably, he then finishes it off with a reference that when he heard of the death of Mar Gregorios, he held a commemorative service in Kharput. He had a picture of Mar Gregorios, which I find intriguing because it's very difficult to find a picture of Mar Gregorios, even today, which he put in the church. And his community was overwhelmed and almost felt as if they were present in Jerusalem. Which brings me to some final remarks. The poem is poetic, not historic. The explanations give the real message. And the message is the history of the Syrian Orthodox. It's a very Antiochian position. So, which, with not so much detail on India itself. So to me, this work is actually also part of a propaganda war from the position of the Antiochian patriarchal community. They wanted the Indians to accept the system of the church as presented by Mar Gregorios and the patriarch. And this is why I wonder whether or not this text has actually been sent, the original one, because this what I present is clearly a copy. Did the original one be sent to India, either to the church of Mar Gregorios or with Sriba? So I want to know if anybody knows anything about this. And then try to stop here.
I know. The original is still preserved in Kerala. It is in Parumala Thirumeni Library. It was discovered in 2002, and on my request, its poetic part was translated into Malayalam as a poem, the same meter, by Episcopos Kurian in 2002, and it was published in Malayalam with an introductory note prepared by me and Father Dr. George Abraham Conan in 2002 in the commemorative volume of the death centenary of Parumala Thirumeni. And it was clearly marked on that original that it was sent to Malfano Martin of Conan for printing at his press. In the original it was written like that. Of course, its explanatory part didn't translate it, and I don't know. And that was never published here. And this Conan Martin, later Episcopus Malfon, was very well known to the Syrians, and he was the owner of the Julius Press, and the books were sent from here. And Mar Gregorios was known to the Syrian bishop because he was assigned to do the correspondence to the Syrian bishops on behalf of Mar Dionysius V, then primate of the Mar Nasranis. So he was well known. The commemorative service not alone done at this Turadeen, it was done at their Mar Marcos at Jerusalem also. There was a long, lengthy letter from the Metropolitan of Jerusalem then in condolence of Parumala Thirumeni, and he mentions the same itinerary of placing not a picture but a full set of this pontifical vestments on a chair, and did the services for the burial for him at the Deir Mar Marcos at Jerusalem. So I'm happy to hear that the copy is still preserved somewhere. The have a photostat copy of the original. Unfortunately, I am an illiterate in Syrian. Thank you.
I want all the books you were talking about.
Just a very important question for Dr. Ginkel. What do you mean? Can you reach us by the poem is poetic? What do you mean by the poem is poetic?
Yeah, that's me, historian, talking. This is a poetic language. It is metaphorical. And in his introduction, Margregorios also says it's remsa. It is symbolic, and it's only in the explanations that, for me as a historian, the material comes. If you do not know the context of this poem, it's very difficult to know who it's really about. And that, so it is beautiful. But then I would have just spent half my hour just reciting this. And trust me, you don't want to hear me recite an Syriac poem. I'm not Sebastian Bach.
Any other question?
Thank you very much for the presentation. And my observation in your presentation, third, it has seemed that Gregorios Thirumeni made a pilgrimage to Holy Land. That is the oldest one in Malayalam. But I would say that even before that, Matan Kariyakil and also Parumala Thirumeni made a long voyage to Rome via Lisbon in 1778 to 1786. So the Malayalam oldest version is still here and it's written in 1785 at Rome.
I stand corrected. Like I said, my knowledge of Indian Christian culture is limited. I have to admit that.
So we thank Dr. Ginkel. Thank you very much. We thank